Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 22 of Rocket Lasso Live, Season 3. How is everyone doing? We've already got a bunch of people here on Twitch. Sound off if you're here. One person popping in already on YouTube. Simulate Softbody, welcome. Yeah, I am also ready to do some Cinema 4D goodness. How is everyone today? It's a beautiful day. Hope everybody is doing well and you're getting vaccinated and able to start going out and doing things in the world. I hope so. Let's see what's going on. Let's cover any news items. Not too much. Well, there's definitely some things to cover. First of all, we launched the next beta for the next plugin, which is actually, there's two different plugins in beta right now, and we just launched that in beta on Monday. So that's getting tested out, but there's a good chance we'll be releasing the next beta already next Monday. So there's going to be 3 plugins in beta at the same time. So that's going to be good to start getting those out into the world. Next up, let's pull this up. We've continued doing in the bonus streams. If you're supporting on Patreon, you can get access to the bonus streams. And yesterday we continued working on this gem project, which is wrapping up. And I'm going to pop open a Redshift here. And I've been modeling up these gems from scratch. It's all been recorded. And, you know, just for bonus streams. It's not like a tutorial or anything. And yesterday we were spending some time making some extra materials here. So like making some ruby, sapphire, citrine, amethyst, a bunch of these different materials. The rose quartz isn't done yet, so that's kind of in progress. So don't count that one. But it's got to render all the caustics. So give that a second to go. But I think they're starting to look pretty cool. And, well, I guess I'll let that finish before we continue too much. But the exciting thing is I'm going to be making these files available on Patreon sooner than later as they begin to wrap up. There's all these different gem types. I think there's no repeats right now. Each of those is a unique gem, as accurate as it could possibly make it. All perfectly planar, very clean geometry. So that should be exciting. And it's been fun to make, but I'm definitely ready to move on to other bonus projects. But those are looking pretty cool. And yeah, and the entire thing's been documented, which is kind of cool. I'm also on the bonus streams. There's a script I end up developing to help make things planar, and it's really, really specific, but you know, that's going to be available on Patreon as well. But yeah, these gems all starting to get wrapped up. I'm hoping to get some, these are all like the transparent materials. I'm hoping to make a couple of like smoky ones, and the quartz is not quite there yet, but yeah. And we'll just see how that all ends up. But it's something that's been fun. I'm looking forward to completing that. And then, pop back up. Actually, I can pull this up on the screen. So I'll click there. And I'm going to be a guest tomorrow on the Maxon live show, the Maxon Ask a Trainer. So I'm going to be guest on there. I'm going to be talking a little bit about Ricochet and then helping them answer questions from the audience. So that's going to be fun. So everybody should go and sign up there, represent Rocket Lasso. You just put in your email, and everybody's probably already getting emails from Maxon, but yeah, come and hang out. I'll be covering some new Ricochet stuff, and it should be fun. Let's close that up, and I guess we can begin the show proper. Let's see, is there anything else to cover? I'll say a couple hellos here. Where's the software? There it is. So, yeah, we got a bunch of people coming in on YouTube. At the last second, I remembered to go and switch the flip. Strike that, reverse it. Flip the switch on YouTube to make it public. So thank you, everybody, for coming and hanging out. Start getting those questions together. And let's see. Standard rules, if you're posting a link, well, first of all, if you're on YouTube, you can't post a link, but feel free to type out a question. I like those. In YouTube, if you do want to post a link, I put a link to the Twitch below, and it's really nice to sign up on Twitch. It doesn't cost anything. And if you follow Rocket Lasso, you get an automatic email when I go live, which is also pretty handy. So that's a thing. Also, Twitch is in real time. So if you're watching on Twitch, you get to see this almost in perfect real time. So those really good responses, and you can post links. But on YouTube, you can rewind, and you can't rewind on Twitch. So they each have their advantages and disadvantages. So post questions. If you post a link, make sure I can see the artist who made it. Otherwise, I won't tackle it, or it has to be abstracted. But I do like typed out questions. Make sure you give the time code. So that covers all of the standard rules. I think we're good to go. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. I don't think there's... Oh, yeah, and I guess another thing is it's a good idea, and everybody in Twitch has been doing it really well. But if you see a question that somebody else asked and you like the look of it, feel free to kind of be like, oh, I like that question, or quote it or reply. And it just makes it so I'm more likely to see it. And once I answer a question, I start wrapping up. Feel free to post a link again. Just don't go spamming it, because that won't be any good. Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. But let's click on the shared screen and prep a new file, and we're ready to go. Let's see. Well, it's going to be hard to resist this one. Somebody, Ancient Hippo, good name, is asking, they're saying you want to recreate this effect using Ricochet. Now, I'm going to click the link. I have no idea what we're going to see, but let's see if it is something that Ricochet is even capable of. Ding. Whoa, crazy. Okay, so this is, well, we're on designboom.com, but it looks like this is, I don't know Designboom as a website, but yeah, this is from Yuichi Ikehata? Yuichi Ikehata? Digitally distorted hybrid human sculpture. Wire and paper. So this might be a real physical prop. The way that these little details are happening on this brick makes it look real, so it could be a photo. I'm assuming that these are actual physical art sculptures. But yeah, this is actually a pretty good use case for some Ricochet stuff. So yeah, I don't mind spending a minute on that, but I'm going to do it quickly because I don't like too much kind of sponsored content type of thing. But I guess it's important to note that we're going to be using Ricochet. Ricochet is a plugin that we recently released. If you're supporting a Patreon, you get some pretty big discounts on buying it. And I think I put links below so you can just find it if you want to. But in any case, let's try and make this. Let's work from ahead. Like, that's a physical sculpture, so I don't mind aiming a little bit more directly for it. So a couple things we could do. I mean, just as a fun process, why don't we do this? Because we almost never do. Why don't we open up Bridge from Quixel? So this is the Quixel Bridge. Let me see if it opens up later. Don't need a new version right now. So let me sign in. Come on. Sign in through Epic Games. Come on, just work. There we go. Aha. Okay, so this is Quixel Bridge. You can download it, and then you pay a monthly subscription. You get access to all their models and materials. So I picked this up for the first time as I was making the commercial for Ricochet, and I did enjoy it. Like, there's a lot of models, and they're really nice. There's not that many models, but there's a decent amount. So in my collection of ones I've grabbed already, there, that's what I was looking for, this broken statuette head. And what's great is it automatically will link to Cinema 4D. So with this being the version of Cinema that I have open, a couple things. We should open it in Redshift. So if I set my render settings, this is really clever. If I set this to Redshift, so now we're using Redshift as our render engine. If I go and say, okay, I want to import this head. So just by clicking, I can say download. And I might have misclicked. Download, please. So what should happen is it knows that I'm in Cinema. So it should be, actually it should have already been downloaded, but now I download that, it's downloaded, and then I should be able to hit this little export button. And as soon as I click export, it says exporting in Cinema, and boop, it automatically appeared inside of my active scene. And there's the head, ready to go. And it's got, a very reasonable poly count, very clean, and the materials look really nice. But the best part is it automatically it detected Redshift was the renderer, and it automatically made a tag. It might have set up some displacement. I don't know if it needed to do any of that, but it also made a Redshift material automatically. So, it's just a cool thing that you can do via that process. But now I've got this nice 3D head ready to be tinkered around with. So the first thing we can do, and we're not trying to replicate that thing identically, but first thing we do is create a extension. Extension Ricochet. So here's Ricochet. And we can drop something in as a child, or I can remote into it as an object. So remote into that as an object, hide the source, and now I'm free to move Ricochet around, and you'll see it's going to be bouncing around inside of it. And if we look at the reference, it's pretty much traveling around the perimeter of the head. It's not very much filling up. It's not filling up the interior side. It's kind of traveling around this outer part. So along those lines, we can do that pretty easily with Ricochet by doing a lot of surface alignment. So if I start cranking this up, you'll see it's going to be starting to follow the surface on the interior. But you'll notice that it might bounce off the nose and then travel the shape of the nose and then travel through the middle of the head. As I kind of pan around, you can see that some lines are traveling through the middle. So we did compensate for that by creating, in the Modify tab, the ability to do this surface offset and a shell. So if I start creating a shell, so essentially I'm giving thickness to the top side and bottom side, and I can show you this by going to maybe a side view here. And we have this visualize checkbox. So if I turn that on, we'll see blue dots that pushed in and orange dots that pushed out. So it kind of becomes like two walls of the surface. So let's go real small there. That actually doesn't have to be too small. So now you can see I've got a bit of a gap in between. So if I take my Ricochet and move it so that it begins in between those two gaps, it should get trapped in between those two. So I don't want to see those dots. But now we can see that those lines are trapped along the outer part of the overall head and not just bouncing around the inside. So I don't want to see the head anymore. With our settings here, I can say I want to travel along the surface. This is the randomness on the surface, so I can kind of do slow twists around. We're doing a lot of alignment on the surface, but that's looking pretty good. So we've got a lot more bounces. So I'm going to start cranking up the count. Ooh, maybe not that many. But yeah, so that starts looking pretty good there. We got all these lines traveling around. And yeah, now we can start turning this into some sort of a mesh. So I'm thinking, well, several things we should do if we're going to try and keep a bit of this going. We see we've got the actual face and a bit of it peeling away. We'll see if we can get some of that effect going as well. And I think the best way for us to go is probably going to be a volume builder and a volume mesher. So we'll put the builder, well, we drop the, we'll save Ricochet for a second. So I'll drop the head inside of the builder. And everything's really small right now, like this overall scene. This head is the size of a human head. So the voxel size is really, really big. So I'm going to drop that to 1, and we start seeing something. Drop that into the mesher. It's going to probably be pretty blobby, not terrible. Yeah, you can see the poly count's quite low. So this is going to drop to maybe 0.25. Yeah, so that's starting to become a reasonable mesh there. So I'm trying to think of the way I want to do this. I think because if we look at this reference, it's kind of like a thin shell of a face. You know what? Instead of dropping that in directly, I might do a bool on it. So how would I want to do that? We'll keep it simple. I'll create a cube. It's a huge cube, T for scale. It goes to show you, Cinema has that default scale, which is kind of like the size of an overall person. But once you're on a smaller scale, everything's coming through enormous. So I'm going to move this into a position, and I'm just going to Boolean out a big chunk of this thing. So we need a few subdivisions. I'm going to keep it relatively low poly. And to get some randomizing, how about a MoGraph random effector? I love doing this. I've been doing it more and more lately. Rename it deform, just so I don't forget. So this is now a deformer. Go to a deformer and say, I would like to deform the points. And the instant I do, it's going to explode. That's because that's set to 50, but let's say 5 by 5 by 5. It's a little more reasonable. I'll use the strength slider now and start pulling back. You see I'm going to be deforming those a bit. So obviously we can crank up the resolution and whatnot, but I don't want to push so far that any of these polygons twist and intersect on top of each other. So along those lines, let's Boolean this. So I'm going to take the head, and let's save this. I haven't saved yet. And let's go into episode 22, scene files. And this will be file 1A, Ricochet, head, wires. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put the word Ricochet. This is what I usually do, is if there's a dependency, I put an underscore and then the name. So people who are on Patreon will get access to scene files. I might have to change this head out because obviously that's, you know, the property of Quixel. But there's a dependency that I've got here, so I'll probably swap it out for a more generic head for those files, but let's save that. And put this into a bool. I used to give bools a bad rap, but you know what? They're not bad. A subtract B is always the default, so now we should see us taking a, well, it should be taking a chunk of the head away. Oh, I'm hiding it, so that makes sense. Also, it's got all these little disappearing things on there from the Ricochet tag. So I'll delete those because we're starting to interact with it. So you can now see that we've got this big bite out of the back. But that's the bool saying A subtract B. I'll turn off Ricochet just so you can see better. So you can see this is A subtract B, but I'm going to actually say I want A without B. And that just means it takes a bite out of it, and it's not like a volume anymore. It just chops that mesh away. So depending on the resolution we feed in will be the resolution that we're going to get kind of some jaggedness on the edges here. So I could say 22, 22, 22. And now you can see it becomes significantly more jagged. But along those lines, we probably have to go a little bit more mild with this break because I can start pushing things too far. We just don't want things breaking if we push them a little bit too far. In any case, that should be a nice bite out of this. We could deform the cube a bit if we wanted this to have a little bit more dimension. Actually, that would be kind of fun. So temporarily, let's turn off of that. And so that's the mesh we're taking a bite of. And you know what? I am subdividing that more than I have to because we got Z, and that could probably just be 1. So, you know, fewer polygons to worry about. Let's take a bend deformer. And the bend is by default aiming upward. I would like it to, yeah, upward is actually fine, but it's way too big. T for scale. Move it up. And I'm going to actually intentionally move it up to this position and say I would like you to bend. Let's bend before the deformation happens. I'll turn that off for a moment so we can see clearly. If I were to take the bend and begin to increase this, you see it's going to start bending. I'm going to spin it 90 degrees so it's bending backward. Something that's cool is if you ever want something to bend kind of equally in 2 directions, instead of rotating and really in a tricky way trying to get that like into that perfect bent position, you can just say in the bend, say unlimited, and it's going to kind of mirror it on the other side. So you can see I've got this nice clean bend happening. Saying keep length, it should shrink that down a bit. And I wonder, it's unlimited. It's going to bend the back of the box. I honestly don't think that's going to have much of an effect on our on the mesh here. Let me just see if there's anything. Yeah, not much I can do to clean it up, but I bet you that it's still going to do the bool fine because all that nonsense is away from the head. But let's find out. Turn on the bool. And yeah, it's still taking a fine bite out of that. Just keep in mind it was very intentional knowing that that could be a problem, but I thought it would work. Anyway, we got a bit of a curve into the head now, just something I wanted. Excellent. So going back into, hit save, going back into the volume builder, I can drag in the bool as a reference. And this as a reference should, oh yeah, we're not going to see anything. Let's visually hide the bool, and we don't see anything. And why is that? Well, actually, you will see a little bit down here. But why aren't we seeing anything? Well, it's because we're giving it like a thin shell of a mesh. It's like hollow. There's nothing to fill it. So we can make it automatically fill. And this is a really good technique you should keep in mind inside of volume builders. And that is to do a dilate and erode. And really, I just think of this as kind of like an inflate or deflate. So if we dilate this, it'll automatically add thickness onto it. Now, once again, we're in a small scene, so that goes a long way. So let's say I just want to inflate this by 0.2. And this is now given thickness to something that used to be infinitely thin. So now we get this nice thin skin traveling along the entire surface. This has to be half the amount of our voxel size. So if that's our voxel size, I could type that in and say, oops, not 25, that'd be bad. 0.25 divided by 2, and that's the minimum thickness that this can have. If you want it to have a smaller thickness, you'd have to decrease your voxel size. So if we drop that to 2, then now this could go to exactly 0.1. So just keep in mind the math there. Otherwise, it'd be so thin that there'd be holes in it. So anyway, now we get the front side of this mesh very accurate to the original one. And now we can turn back on our Ricochet, and you still see that we get those lines. Something that's cool about Ricochet set up this way is we are remote linked in. I am linked into the object via just dragging it into this inexclude, which means we didn't lose control. Even though this is being consumed by the bool and creating a completely different mesh, the Ricochet is viewing it before it got put into the bool. So it's a fun way of being able to interact with objects before they got affected. Now, if I think about it a little bit more, if we look at the original mesh, all of the crazy wires are happening behind the face. So in the place where I had, I'll turn that off first. No, we'll leave it on. When I put that shell around the outside, I should have made it a little bit more pushed in. But what's cool about Ricochet is we have a setting for that. So we gave it that little bit of thickness, but I could start, let me visualize it. You see these dots. I want those orange dots to push downward, so we can take the surface offset and start going negative on that and push the entire thing in. And now you can see all those wires are now down below. As long as the Ricochet is still existing in between those two layers, which I do think it is, then that should just be trapped in between. And now you see that those Ricochet lines aren't escaping on the outer part of the model. Excellent, excellent. I don't want to see the visualize, they're just in the way. So now we've got these wires bouncing around, seems to be working fine. So let's feed those into the volume builder as well. You could make it a child directly, but typically if I remote into one object, as I did with the bool, I like remoting into everything. It gets a little confusing if you remote certain objects in and and you make other ones a child. Especially because if something's a child and you delete, it deletes the child. But if you remote link into it and delete it, it doesn't delete the object. So I just like to keep it consistent. Having said that, let's just drag in our ricochet. So the ricochet's got a base thickness as well. So we want to set that to be pretty small. I mean, 0.2 is the smallest we'd probably be able to go. So we might need to push that smaller, but it is a radius, so we can probably say 1. Nope, 1 is too thin. So just for more detailed mesh, we'll have to go to 0.1, and there we go. Now we start being able to see those lines pop in, give it whatever thickness we want. We could push this even smaller. I mean, this is not an insane mesh, all things considered. So we don't want to go too crazy, so 0.75. So just a little bit thicker. I typically don't like to make splines be the exact same radius. I like to let them be a little bit bigger because it just gives you a more consistent line. And speaking of consistent line, it's very likely that when you put a spline in, that it's going to have a small density of something like 0.1, and that's the sample distance. It's essentially internally, Cinema is subdividing this line a bunch of times and putting little circles around it, and that's how many times it's checking it. So if you get really spotty lines like that, then you need to increase your density. So if I go up to 0.5, it's going to be better, but still not enough to see the line. Let's go to 1, and you'd think that 1 would be a good amount, but still that's not enough to really complete the line here. So then if we start pushing it to maybe 2 or 3, that is like, okay, that's the radius. If we start pushing the density up to like 2 or 3, we're going to start seeing enough where the line starts getting implied. But if we finally go up to 5, I think it's finally enough connections to bridge the gaps in between all of them. But I like to push it even further just to get more samples. And you see how just by increasing the samples, look how those became thicker, more colliding lines. Like they have a more consistent thickness is what I'm trying to get at. So yeah, excellent. That's working fine. And yeah, now that we got that kind of crazy mesh traveling around the backside of this, I would like to get a little bit of smoothing going. So create a smoothing, drop that as a child of the mesher, and that's going to start rounding all those out. And yeah, I just love the way the smoothing works. Small hint with smoothing, get rid of all the stiffness, and then you can decrease your iterations. That's how many times it's going to find its neighbors. So it just causes it to need less calculations. So we'll put a couple layers of smoothing just to thin those out a little, get a little smoother curve. Keep in mind that will be affecting the face as well, but the face has more geometry than it needed. So I think that's perfectly fine. If we wanted more chaos on these wires, we do have several options where we could increase the bounce or the randomness inside of the ricochet. But another thing we might be able to do, and I'm not sure how well this will work, but let's temporarily turn off those. What I might like to do here is deform this. And in fact, we've already got a random deform, so I'm going to steal a copy of that and drop it inside. And now you see it's deforming the ricochet. So this is kind of like we got those really nice accurate bounces, but now based on this, I could just add some extra deformation and a little more chaos on that. And that just becomes a really easily controllable setting. And I mean, some are going to stick out through the face, but depending on the, what you're going for here, that could be a plus. But we could tell this only to affect the backside. We also don't have to do this at all. We could thin out the entire mesh. A lot of different options. But if I start increasing this, and of course the volume mesher is not going to be quick, but you can see how we could push this and start getting some super chaos in there. But something mild just to maybe a couple of these poke out and starts looking a little more chaotic if we were so inclined. Potentially we could even take this final bool and inflate out the entire thing. That could be fun. So I'm going to make a plane effector. And let me show you what I'm going to do here. I just want it to be very clear. So here's the face. Taking this plane effector, I'm going to drop it in as the third child, and I'm going to deform it again. So point deform. I'll say dot deform. It's really easy to forget that that's what it is, so I just immediately name it. It's pushing out on Y, but we want to push out on Z. So I'm going to type in 1, which will be too much, but you're going to see it's going to inflate and push out the face a bunch. So now I can just pull back on this and get to push out exactly the amount I want. So that's just another control we have. Once again, Ricochet is ignoring it because it's sampling it before that happened. So Ricochet is not affected, but the volume mesher will be affected. So now we've got that extra chaos in the face, and I could take this and push the face out more, or we could even type in a negative number and let that push inward. So just another control to be able to affect that. Let's see. I'm trying to think of what. Yeah, I've got an idea of how to do something. What I'd love to do is get an outline of this entire object, where that mesh is. Not something we could do quite yet, but maybe soon in the future. And let us. I want to inflate this on the edge a little bit more. I think that would be a really cool effect. Now we're already doing that a little bit with this plane deform, and I would like to push that concept further. I think what I would like to do is make a second one, just so we have two separate ones. This one, I'm going to intentionally crank it up like way too much. And let's, again, just look at the mesh, keep it simple. So simplify everything. Now you see this is overinflating, but I want this to only deform where it's gotten the bite taken out. So the quickest way to do that is probably going to be to drag this cube over. And if I tell this cube to be based on the surface, then now I have a radius in which, there we go, look at that. Now I have a radius in which to say, how far is it away from that deformed cube surface? So as I increase this radius just a little bit, and a little is going to go a long way. Let's say this is like 0.25. Actually, that is not, it's almost like it's not happening until after the, it's like it's ignoring the bend in a way. Maybe it is. I'm not entirely sure. There might be a way around that. If that's what's happening, if I put that into a connect and say, actually look at that connect object. There we go. Haha. Okay, so it wasn't seeing the deformed version of the cube. So I put it into a connect, which essentially bakes down the deformed version. And I fed in that as the source. And now it is seeing that curved edge. And now you can see that my outer part of the overall head is getting deformed, like with these big wings on that outside. So again, I intentionally pushed it too far, but now we just have a slider in which we can say, okay, how much is that pushing in or not pushing in? So working quite nicely. And let's see, what are other things I might want to do there? Well, we don't have to have that be happening everywhere. So I could say, hey, random field, and the random field will multiply, meaning erase out other parts, and it's already noise-based. So let's see, it's probably pretty large. I'm gonna drop that down. And now you'll see as I click the random seed that different parts are being affected in different ways. So it's just not affecting everywhere all the time. But yeah, that is deforming that geometry, which is all getting filtered through everything else. Meaning I should be able to just turn our volume back on again. And now you can see that the edges curl out, which is what we wanted. And turn back on, oops. Turn back on our Ricochet. And now we've got this, yeah, we got this nice shell that pulls in from the corner. That's really nice, actually. And yeah, all these chaotic wires traveling around the back. The face is a little bit inflated because of what we did. I'm not going to worry about that. We could have shrunk the Ricochet, but that is perfectly fine with me. And then if we're looking at this as far as other details, I mean, there's a couple extra flaps here. That could just be some basic geometry. These things spiraling out is just more wire, honestly. And I don't even think I would do that with a Ricochet. There wouldn't be a benefit to doing it. Like, yeah, we could, but there's not much of a reason to. So you could just clone some extra splines doing their thing. Throwing it out there, a lot of that seems to be like twisted wire. So if we were inclined, just to throw this out, I'll save this. I mean, essentially we're pretty much done. Although somebody is asking a question about how we might texture. Texture a volume measure. But before we do, sorry, I just saw something in the chat and it lost my concentration. But I was going to say, as an option, we could always sweep this Ricochet instead. So if I say I want to put that into a sweep, and then the sweep is going to sweep what? Well, we can keep it simple with an end side, which is going to be huge, but drop the radius to something kind of reasonable. And we start pulling this down, down, down until we can see the individual lines traveling around. And we want it a little smoother, so I'll say 12 sides, which will round that out. These lines are very chunky right now, but in Ricochet, we could say, actually, let's go to spline mode and enable something like a B-spline, and I'll set that to be subdivided, increase this. So these are just standard cinema controls, but if we set this to be the proper size, we should be able to get this to start rounding itself out a bit. Actually, something I wasn't considering, but this deform is deforming it based on those points. So you see if I get rid of it, that these start becoming nice and smooth. But if we say after the fact, like, oh, but now deform it, we've now given it more points to deform, which is gonna make it look more chaotic, which is cool, but it's going to get away from the smoothing we did. So those two are fighting each other a bit. And then you see I've got smoother lines, which is what I was going for. But here's something cool. If you've never done this type of thing before, something that's really fun is we are sweeping a given profile. So we're sweeping an end side. That end side is hanging out right there. But what if we wanted to make that twisted wire effect? To show you, do you see this twisted, there's like two wires that are twisted around each other? Well, if we want to do that everywhere, well, let me show you. I'm gonna copy, open a new file, paste. So there's, it's really tiny. So there's our tiny end side. What I would do is something simple, like put that into a cloner and I would like to clone on X, so X2, 1, and then those have to be really close together. So I'll type in something small, 0.1, and just push these as far apart as you need to. So 1, 2, yeah, that's fine. So now we get those 2, and if we drop that into a connect, that should weld them together. Actually, turn off welding because I don't want to weld. I just want them baked down. So that becomes like the profile. It's entirely parametric. And if we go into, actually, let me change that to, it'll be neat to show you. I'm going to set it to radial. I'm going to say I want 2 of them, and then the radius will be 1.2. No, 0.12. And there we go. So it should be, let's put it on the proper plane. And it looks like it has to be smaller. Divide that by 2. There we go. So we're kind of back to where we were, but I'll show you why I did that in a second. Copy that, and we'll go back into the other file. Paste, and that just replaces that first end side. And now you'll see that for every one of these wires, we actually have 2 wires now. So we get that double wire thing going. That entire thing could scale down a bit. And then in the sweep, we'll just start giving it some end rotation. Now we're gonna need a lot. If I type in 720, which is double 360, it doesn't even look like it registers because these lines are so long. So this is the total rotation over the entire thing. And this ricochet line is pretty long. So I'm gonna add extra 0, another 0, another 0, and finally we're getting to the point where we can start seeing some twisting. This is dependent on the number of subdivisions that we have. You see it starts looking pretty bad right there. So inside of the spline, in this case the ricochet, I'm going to say actually I would like more subdivisions, and now you see there's more for it to view. But we're going to have to probably push that pretty tiny, so let's go 0.1. There we go. So now it's really small, but we start seeing the twisting happening. And again, in the sweep, just keep on. I don't want 10 times as many, so let's do times 3. And a few more subdivisions, and I think that will look pretty good. So back into the ricochet, and we'll do 0.075. And there we go. Just enough subdivisions to get those crazy wires twisted around all over the place. It's going to be traveling and traveling and traveling and traveling over the entire thing. So keep in mind, if we wanted to randomize some thickness, we could create more than one line, which Ricochet can totally do. But in this case, because it's just one continuous line, I think if we take our end growth and say, actually at the end it's 50%, that should just, no, I'm sorry, not end growth, but end scale, 50%. That means some of these lines will get to be half the length, and it'll just kind of look random. You'll see that there's like a big fat one right next to a real small one. Looks like a few more subdivisions would be called for. I mean, we've made a lot of polygons now. There we go. So, but look at this mesh. I guess it's not crazy, but we need that many polygons to make it look smooth. But yeah, you can see now we got all these wires twisting at different sizes, different scales, all traveling around. I think it looks pretty cool. In addition, oh, and what I was saying with the reason I built this with the radial is now I could increase the count. So let's set that up to 3. And just by changing that number, we'll give it a second to refresh. Now there are 3 circles traveling around in a radial. So there are 3 of them twisting around. And, you know, very different look of a coil. So kind of cool. Fun rig to layer up on top of everything else. And yeah, Ricochet's super powerful along these lines. I will save this as a secondary version. In case anybody wants to do that twisted wire effect. And yeah, those files will be available on Patreon. Oh yeah, so going back to the other file, somebody was asking as a follow-up, texturing this. So here is a volume measure, and how could we go about texturing this? Well, it doesn't, well, we could try and reproject the original material onto the surface. We did cover that a few weeks ago, maybe a month or 2 ago. So I don't want to just like redo that entire thing. And when it comes to applying materials, and because we already used Quixel, why don't we grab some material here? Well, here's like a Icelandic rock. So I'll send that over. So there it is in Cinema. So of course, an obvious thing to do, and it's definitely a go-to I do, which is don't drop it on UV mapping because it's not going to really know what to do. But you set that to something like cubic, and especially if you set up a triplanar, which is not something I'm an expert in. Certainly not. But yeah, that's cubic. It's going to be really big. So let's select that, and you'll see it's a huge box. T for scale. Start shrinking that in until it's something reasonable. Something I often do when I'm using cubic would be to rotate it to some angle that's not exactly like 180, because then it gets harder to see the tiling. So just like a little bit of rotation on there, it would be harder to see the tiling. Now, I don't know that that's going to look any good, and this is probably wants a whole bunch of subdivisions to do some proper subdividing. But let's just see if that does anything. I mean, so that's my super duper quick go-to. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the long kind of slats of the rock are coming through. So cubic is a fine way to do it. Triplanar is just like cubic, but has blending on the edges, which goes a really long way. And then you could try and do some proper UV maps, but this thing is super subdivided. So I gotta say, I'm a little intimidated by the idea of doing that, because look at our sheer polygon count. Like, this is kind of ridiculous. Having said that, I mean, if you're going to do materials on something, you do have to think about things in very particular ways. But what we might be able to do to clean this up, and I guess I'll save this as another version. I guess it's A2, head wires, texture. Something that has this dense of a mesh is a little bit intimidating. In the volume mesher, we could get some adaptive going. If I start increasing this, you see that the poly count is going to start, it's going to start looking kind of ugly, but it does drop the poly count dramatically. So if we push that up decently far, not so much as to break it, and honestly, when it comes to this, don't even look at the mesh, just look at if the geometry seems okay. Now, what I do want to do, but I don't think it's going to work very well, is I'd love to throw this into, now that we have this kind of slightly lower poly version, which will help, I would like to throw this into the newly implemented remesher. So if we make the remesher, I can drop that in. The problem I've seen with the remesher, and is it calculating? Oh yeah, it's still calculating, so it's processing. Is when you get these kind of like honeycomb-ish patterns, all these wires crisscrossing and doing their thing, it sometimes doesn't know what to do with them, and it can break a lot of them, or it can even leave holes sometimes, which I'm a little bit surprised I can just make a hole. But in any case, it's still calculating. I guess we still threw in a pretty big mesh, so it's struggling. It's not the type of mesh that it likes. Yeah, and that's all these details. Now, these wires could have been a entirely separate mesh. Okay, you see, it did finish, and that's, I wonder if that's even something to keep in mind, where it is now made much better quads, but it's at the same count. And it's doing a pretty good job on this overall, but like I said, expect holes, especially when I start decreasing our mesh. So I'm going to drop this to 20%, and I don't know if it's going to take as long to calculate, because I think it's supposed to kind of cache the mesh inside a bit. But yeah, so that was quicker, and you can see now that we've got fewer polygons. But now, just moving the camera there triggered a refresh, which is a problem I have with the remesher sometimes. But now you'll see, oh, every time I move the camera, it's going to freak out. So let me just zoom up, and we'll see if we can find a problem area. And that's a place where I might make it editable. But I'm just trying to see. Yeah, I think like right here, like that's really weird geometry. Right there is a hole that I don't know if it should be there. Right here, look, that was a wire that just traveled across, and it couldn't handle it. So keep in mind that type of thing. Now, having said that, something I might do here would be to, let's turn that off. Something I might do would be duplicate this volume mesh and just make it so that the head and the wires are two separate things, because we're not really worried about UVs on those wires. So in this mesh, in this volume builder, I'm not worried about the model. That is just the ricochet line. But in this one, we will not be worried about the ricochet. So that just becomes the front of the head. And yeah, it's still, this one now doesn't need to go adaptive, so that can still be nice smooth ricochet lines. This one doesn't have that thickness, so maybe some lines will sneak through, but that's fine. This volume mesher, we could probably push it even further. Like, I really want the adaptive. Yeah, it's fine. Oh, and we kept on, honestly, we kept on pushing this volume builder to be more and more detailed. And that's not necessary anymore. We could probably push this up quite a bit. And it doesn't need anywhere near as much resolution to look pretty good. I guess 0.2 is the minimum for what we're feeding that. Okay, so now we've done that. Now let's try just feeding the front part of this face into the remesher. And that should, yeah, it's going to calculate way quicker, and that is just the type of mesh that it likes a lot more. So if we drop this down to a 10% density, then now you can see, well, some of it's starting to break. You can see those holes sneak through, so maybe 20% is about where we can go. Sometimes turn on keep outline can help, but you know, not necessarily always. But the point here being is I've now remapped that head, in spite of being a volume mesher, into a reasonable mesh. And that reasonable mesh could probably be fed through some UV systems. So if I didn't want to lose this, I can use another Rocket Lasso plugin, Recall. If I double click, it's now storing this information. So if I make, when you make certain generators editable, it consumes all the tags. So I'm just gonna put that recall up onto that. So now I can make this editable and we get this mesh going. Hitting save on this version of it. Let's see if we can unwrap these UVs on somewhat reasonable way. Now we do have this big edge that travels the outside. The smart thing to do would be to try and select the outline, but I don't think that's gonna be easy to do. Like, yeah, this mesh is gonna like super want to travel and do its own thing. It's gonna be a difficult angle to grab, but the quicker way would be if I just kind of ignore it and if we just do a path. And I'm intentionally staying one away from the edge, even though we should be traveling that edge. But if I carefully go around and trace out, how quickly can I do this? I'm gonna start doing it real sloppy because this isn't the point. But you can imagine doing a very careful job of this. Essentially what I'm trying to do is just separate the front, the front side and the back side of it. We got a little bit of funky mesh there, but let's just keep moving forward. Okay, so now we've got that edge. So let's see if this works. In going inside of our UV edit, here is our crazy UVs, which obviously are nonsensical. But if we take this head and I start out by doing a projection, something like a frontal projection, it's like, okay, there's the head. And then we can start smoothing it out or breaking things. So under Relax UV, we have these different modes. And I can say use selected edges, and that will cut those selected edges. I am not pinning any points. I don't think I have any points selected. So those are free to move around as they want. So I don't know if this will work, but I'll hit apply. A hard edge is shared by more than 2 polygons. I don't know what that means, but it sounds bad. Presumably there's some funkiness on one of these corners and there's a hard edge, whatever that means. I'm assuming, no, that sucks because I just don't know. It could be anywhere and I just wouldn't know. That's why I was trying to stay on these cleaner, slightly inner edges, but any one of these could be that break. And I'm just gonna see if there's any obvious places to possibly avoid that. Hard edge. I've never gotten that warning before. I'm a little curious what it is, but and those could be offending. Bloop. And I'll just fix these, and then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Okay, let's try again. Back to UV edit. Boing. Come on, LSCM. No, hard edge. I don't know what that means, but apparently there's some polygon it doesn't like. Go. No. All right, I give up. We'll just try one of the other packaging methods, and I'm just not sure what's going on. I feel like we're pretty much away from the edge now, so I don't know what edge it doesn't like. But yeah, let's try the automatic UV. We've dropped this down to something semi-reasonable. So I'm just gonna hit, here's our automatic UV. I'll just say, go. And actually that did a shockingly good job. So this mode did work. It looks like we had a couple of isolated islands, but you can see how it broke those apart, and it even figured itself out. It didn't use my edge, it actually used that sharp edge, and it was like, hey, that's a good place to break it, and it did a pretty good job. So that is now pretty good UV mapping without, like, I just clicked the automatic button. All that selection I did, didn't have to do it. So that is Cinema and the new UV tools doing a good job of automatically laying itself out on that mesh. And with that laid out now as a UV, we can just apply this material brand new, and it's just going to be using the UVWs, and it should be mapped pretty dang well. So if we jump into Redshift again and hit go, let's see how that looks. Yeah, look at this mapping, way better. It's kind of giving a mummy vibe, but that's because of the type of material I brought in. In fact, let's bring in this moss material, just because I think it's going to show a little bit more. Actually, no, here's a sandstone, or mud. Do we want mud? Brick. Rock rough, that'll work. Download. That's weird, I could have sworn I had these downloaded, but maybe not. So, downloaded, exporting to cinema. Automatically comes in. Drop it on. Boop. Updates instantly there. Look at that. Look how nice that is mapped now via, you know, just a little bit of cleanup and then an automatic UV unwrapping. Pretty dang good. And yeah, then we could just drop that on there, and I probably would cubic map the wires. And yeah, there we go. Not too bad. And then a little displacement on that would probably go a long way, but I'm not going to worry about that. So that's, I think that's where I'll wrap this one up. I want to definitely be able to tackle some more questions. If anybody has any specific follow-ups on this, then feel free to post them. But I'll look around in the chat for a little bit and see what we got. Let's see. Let's see. But yeah, I guess as a quick shout out with that being Ricochet, I'll just pop open the Ricochet page if anybody wants to check it out. Let me search for Ricochet. Where is it? Boom. So if anybody's curious, here is the Ricochet info page. And like I said, if you are on Patreon, you get discounts. Let's see. I'm going to check YouTube because that question came from Twitch. Looks like RBLX was thinking the same thing about like optimizing the points and then UV unwrapping. And yep. Get the detail back in the face. Well, just to throw it out there, there wasn't that much detail in the original face. Let me pull it out. Actually, I consumed, you see, well, actually, no, the original one is here. So if I just pull this out, you'll see that this is the original one. And it is not, oh, that is, I thought I copied it. Duplicate, and now you'll see as I pull this out, this is pretty dang low poly. I don't think we're missing almost any of the detail of what the head had. And the head, it just goes to make sure your volume mesher has enough subdivisions to count. And then if you're going to use that remesher, make sure that it doesn't subdivide or get rid of so many that you lose your detail. But yeah, I don't think we lost much when it comes to that head. Yeah, RBLX. It could have very well have not been the cut, but been the mesh. Entirely possible. I'm not sure I'm following what you're saying, though. Pretty sure it's possible on a character when you rotate a bone, because first of all, there aren't bones anymore. They're joints. Bones haven't been around for like 14 years. Rotate a bone to an angle, one tag, then the deformer starts. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not following. Hello to Turkey from Chicago. Stone material, yep, totally. Peter from the Netherlands. I've been to the Netherlands several times. It's very beautiful. Let's do... We got some links coming in. I just want to see if anybody's repeating anything. Good. Ancient Hippo, could you create a smoother gradient from where the wires blend into the mesh? I mean, I would do it as a single mesh, presumably. If you spend more time with the UVs, it'd be fine. It just goes to throwing everything into a volume mesher. You were pretty much saying like, okay, I don't care what the mesh does. I don't care about the UVs anymore. Like that just goes out the window. So procedural texturing or like redoing the UVs or just using triplanar mapping is kind of the way to go. As far as being a little bit more dynamic with the way those things combine, I would just start using other techniques, other fall offs. If you make things editable, you could use a vector map, a vertex map, to do some sort of gradient fall off. Like you could do all of those things depending on where it happened. I guess just as because that's an interesting question. If I open up the very first file, this is when all that's combined as one giant one. If we wanted to kind of get where those two things were starting to intersect and get like a little bit of fancier material stuff going, there's no way around it except to make it editable. Again, using a ricochet tag, or I'm sorry, a recall tag is really nice there because I can pull that out and then bake this down. In fact, I'll even put that into a, like, I'll make a connect, turn off the weld, and then drop it in because I don't want those accidentally welding and taking a long time. But I'm putting a connect so it keeps the smoothing applied automatically. But now that's been baked down. So now this is, you know, this is baked down. It's no longer dynamic. But now we can do whatever the heck we want with all these connections. So first of all, you could just manually paint everything where they connect, or we can try and automate it to whatever degree is possible. And one way might be, and at this point with that being made editable, everything else is not doing anything. So we're just down to a very simple mesh. Actually, with the way I deleted things, that recall tag won't do anything anymore. But, oh, actually, I shouldn't have, I'm going to undo a few times because I shouldn't have deleted the cube. I still need this cube. So, come back, cube, and that crazy cube can still be referenced in the model. So I'll hide that visually. Let's add a vertex map. Set vertex weight, 0, turn on, and hopefully this isn't too slow because there's a lot of points. Use fields. And now I don't want to worry about freezing it, but I do want to drop this in as a mesh and immediately see everything super affected. But I can say I don't want the points. I would like it to be based off the surface. And we need this to be real small, so I say like 0.5. And with any luck, there we go. Yeah, now that is done a pretty dang good job of creating. Nope, I'm going to have it selected. Yeah, now you can see I've got a pretty good edge selected there. It just goes to, at least in Cinema as it is right now, we cannot, you can't have a vertex map unless it's been made editable, but you can now see that that would allow you to do some sort of texture gradient going from one side to the other. Trying to think of anything I might do more specifically. I mean, you could do that via some vertex or some proximal stuff, but let's not go there. I wonder, this is probably not going to run very quickly. I'm a little worried, but I kind of want to put a growth on here just to see what happens. So if we put a, where is it? A freeze. And then we set the freeze to auto update, grow, and then this is going to be huge. So let's set this to like 0.1. Oh dear. Yeah, it's already not refreshing very quickly. So this is a little too dangerous to hit play on. But let's try hitting 1 frame forward. I just want to make sure something's happening, so I'm going to make this bigger. Bing. Several things I might not have. Oh, it is working. Okay, so you can see instantly now that it is growing. And I put a pretty big number in here, but when it refreshes, you see it's going to start growing down these lines. So that could be kind of cool. Once again, okay, so that's that vertex map. Once again, I maybe shouldn't have done something I did because now I'm going to undo a bunch of times. Actually, I'll just revert. And I just hit undo a few times, so it's going to be. Oh, it's nice. Twitch says first time chat. So, Terpini, yeah, welcome. Thanks for making it. I'm going to say file revert to saved project because in that exact same way, I could make this again editable. In this case, we could probably say current state object. I always forget about that because I love the connect object so much. If we just say connect objects and delete, does that bake it down proper? I think so, yeah. I think that worked. So, oh, yeah, so what I want to do this time is almost the exact same thing. Points, mesh, no, select, vertex weight, set. Now we get the tag. Instead of, well, we use fields, but instead of feeding in that one object that happened to be where they collided, what if I try and drag in the ricochet? So I'll bring that in as a spline object, and I guess it's going to travel up to the head. I'm trying to change the display mode. There's a lot going on. N-A. Yeah, so you can see it looks almost camouflage patterned, but with red and yellow. But that's because the spline comes in as shape from curve, which it's always interesting that that's the default, because to me that's way less useful. But if I change that to be not, or along, that's, I'm sorry, along, I can set that to radius, and now it's seeing the radius of the line. If we set that to something small like 0.1, you can now see that where that line is traveling inside, it's getting illuminated. So if we double that, let's say 2, then these lines should start becoming pretty dang solid. And you'll see now that these are pretty much just texturing while they are creating a vertex map only where these lines were. And you can see that they're going to kind of blend into the mesh where they just kind of come into contact. In this case, you know, a bunch of those wires are traveling near the head. We could have done things with Ricochet to make it avoid, but this wasn't a goal at the time. So you'll get a couple streaks on the face. Not bad, though, overall. And yeah, you can see those get colorized. So this would be another really neat way to get that transition. Again, not parametric. It would be great if it was, but you know, we can still get there and get these cool texture combinations. And then even just kind of getting this ambient occlusion type look because of the way the lines are falling off. It's kind of neat. But yeah, another cool layer to add on top of that. And you could blur, we could probably even blur those front ones out. Or we could make a selection tag. Like right now we could select everything and say, okay, but ignore those with a separate selection. So there are ways of doing that here. Once you make it editable, obviously you can just do whatever tools you want. Cool. But yeah, I just wanted to cover a couple extra details there, but let's definitely move on to an entirely new question, because that was, well, it's good content, I think, but that was like an hour on one question. I just want to see if anybody, I'm going to scroll up a little bit because I don't want to miss those questions. I guess I'll tackle from Mike. It's a first-time chat from the viewer, so let's see what we got. We got something from Instagram. Let me mute the tab just in case there's audio, which there was. Okay, cool. This is the type of thing. Well, I mean, everything. It's falling in the correct qualifications for me to attempt to tackle it. So this is from Motion Mate. Oh, no, this is Motion Mate, I think, is one of those aggregate people. And it was actually created by Cy Gaussens and Blink Audio. So I'm assuming that would be the audio. So Cy Gaussens. I mean, I would like to prefer to see it on their page if we can find it. Is that this one? No, it's this one. Ah, I found it. Just as a heads up, it's totally fine, and I was able to track it down really easily. Try and track down the source, because this was not, you know, you linked me to an aggregate place instead of the original. But I found it. So that is muted. Good. YouTube can get upset if this could be playing any audio. Tackle this. Here's one of the tricks, though, is especially with you being a first-time poster, there's a lot of different things happening here, and you know, this is, you know, this animation could have taken them a long time to put together, and it more goes to like what is the most interesting components of it, because here, you know, that's kind of one thing happening, and then we start forming these different shapes. But in general, I think I know what you're getting at here. The actually, how would I go about doing that? Because I got a thought. An experiment is pretty much the way I'm going to spend doing this entire thing. Is can we use the concept of a vertex map to drive a bunch of dynamic clones to go into particular positions? That's the idea. So just to be fun, maybe not. Maybe I'm trying to think of a way of laying them out, but you know, I was going to try and make it not a grid, but it just comes to like a grid is a good layout. Now we don't want to go too crazy with the layout, because the more points we make, the slower it's going to go. And you know, we're trying to do a real-time live stream here, so we're going to keep it pretty clean. We can expand that later if need be. Setting a vertex map, vertex weight to get the vertex weight map tag. We'll deal with that later. Next, in order to make it run quickly, I will make a tiny little cube, 5 by 5 by 5. And I'll move, because it's a cube that's 5 by 5 by 5, I'll move the floor to -5. We're in point mode. Let's go to object mode. -5, so it's double the distance. So there's a little bit of a drop. Then that will go into a cloner. That is a fine grid, but let's make it a little smaller, 155 by 155. type in whatever we need here. Let's say 11 by 11. Oops. Endpoint 11 by 11. So we get some. We can definitely do more than that. 22 by 22. Okay, that's a reasonable small number to begin with here. So we want gravity, but probably very little gravity. So Control D, Dynamics, Gravity 200. We'll keep it light. These need to be dynamic. So adding a simulation rigid body onto the cube in order to make it run super quick and accurate. For now, we'll probably change it, but I'll change the shape, the automatic shape in the dynamics to be ellipsoid. So they're calculated as spheres, which means they're kind of free to roll around. And yeah, let me think. If we're driving this with a vertex map, how can we translate the vertex map into some sort of attraction? We could make it only exist in certain spots. That feels a little clunky. Like a vertex map is fun. I mean, a basic, let me do a couple things here first. I'm gonna make a tube, which is not an intuitive shape to make here, but by setting it to 4 segments, I can hit R for rotate, and we can spin that. Actually, I have a better idea. Because we're in a simple setup here, I'm going to make a floor, and that floor will also live on -5. And then I'll make another floor, and you're not gonna see it because I have environment turned off. Boom. Okay, so there's a floor. So now let's make a second floor, and that one I'll spin positive right there, and we scoot that off exactly 200. So now they cannot get through that. A floor is an absolute wall it cannot escape from. So then we'll duplicate that floor and set it to -90 and negative or opposite X. So now they're a box of 2 right there. And then with those 2 selected, I'll make another duplicate, hit R for rotate and spin 90 degrees. And now you can see I've super trapped our entire simulation inside of walls that are impossible to escape out of. So that is all good. Make it null. All those can hang out inside of said null where we don't need to worry about them, but they do need to be dynamic. There we go. So those become what we're actually colliding with. If I hit play right now, everything should fall, hit the ground, and it should be fine. Cool. Saving right away. How do we even say this? Particle. Filling. Forming shapes with dynamics. I mean, that's not quite right, but close enough. Forming shapes with dynamics. Okay. Now, the obvious thing to do is going to be something with forces. Forces are awesome, of course. Anything we feed into these forces will automatically become a shape. So let me just show you the super basics. If we go under the Object tab, I finally remembered not to be in fall off, but let's go to Object, drag in something like a random field. Now that random field has, let's crank up our display line so you can see here's a volume of it, but you know I like seeing it 2-dimensionally, so I'll do that. And show me this line density, vector length. I'm going to double up those. Okay, so it's a little bit subtle. Actually, the floor we don't need to see. That'll be easier for you to see. Do you see how we can kind of see this noise pattern based on that? Now that goes off into infinity based on the overall scale of this. Make it a bit bigger. We can see some definitive patterns now. So if I hit play, oh yeah, no animation speed. So if I hit play, and these are free to kind of roll around, you see how these are instantly going to form patterns? That's the concept. That's kind of like the world that we're playing in here. So it's more about how do we get particular shapes to show up? And that's where I'm at right now. We could make like a spline. Splines are fine shapes to make a pattern. And those would create different attraction points. It's not quite what I want to do though. And then when it comes to a vertex map, we can make each individual point be an attractor, but that's not quite what I want to do either. I was trying to think of how we can make a vertex map animate and possibly even look up the old formula for reaction diffusion, which we haven't done in a long time. Yeah, reaction diffusion is a very specific equation you just type in. I'm trying to think of what I want to do here, because everything will be attracted to the nearest local, like away from the negative attractors or towards the positive ones. There's a lot of different possibilities. I just actually had a weird thought. That would be weird. What if we did it via just deformation? I don't think this is going to look very good, but I'm super curious. Let's turn off the force, and let's just deform this thing. I shall create another random deformer. Random dot deform. And what if we feed this? This is going to be interesting. What if we deform the points? I want these to... Oh, dang it. I did a random... I don't want random. I want a plane. So here's a plane. Dot deform. That will deform up on Z. And then, now that it's going to be deforming up on Z, we'll tell it to actually be a deformer. And you see it's deforming all the points upward. Now that it's deforming on Z, we can fall off via a random field. So now you can see that the pattern emerges. We can crank that up. So now you can see we got this pattern happening. Now, what if we feed in something that's got a very distinct pattern, like maybe a chronal? Or is that chronal? Probably chronal. 500. I really want to see this a little bit more distinctly, so let's crank this up cartoonishly high. And I kind of like it to center. How do we make it center? I'm just going to cheat and create a solid and add a solid of minus 100 and unclamp. Okay, yeah, so let's say minus 50. Okay, there we go. Pretty good. Pretty good trick there. So now we can see these ups and downs very, very, very blatantly. So if we feed in after the range map, I'm going to externalize a curve. So I could clamp this curve in. Yeah, they're going to fight each other a bit. That's fine. Oh, I had to pull that way down. Let's turn off that solid. Okay, so now you can see that we get these peaks going. So if these become these peaks, and now we do the opposite. I want lots of gravity. So let's go double gravity. So if we allow that to animate, I won't make it too quick. And also we need a few frames for it to get into position. So I will keyframe at frame 20. It'll be strength 100. And at frame 0, it'll be strength 0. So those will transition in relatively quickly. So those will pop in. But now those are going to become things that can be collided with. So let's see what that does. Simulation, rigid body. Actually, it should be a collider body. So dynamic off. But then we say that it is something to be collided with, and it has to be a moving mesh. So now those go up, and everything else is getting bashed around, okay? So that kind of makes sense. But if we hide this plane, then now we're just going to see the end result of these moving around. And with a really heavy gravity, they're just going to be forced to move around in different directions. So now you can see kind of maybe these different types of patterns emerge as they move around. Several things that could be helpful. Let's tell the dynamics of the cubes. I'm going to like drain their energy out a lot. So we'll do a bunch of damping. I wonder if we say 99. Yeah, so that's going to be draining tons of their energy out. So only when they're forced around, they will go. Let's kill off the friction, though. So no friction, no bounce. So now they should be free to just be slid around. And yeah, now you see almost we're getting a very similar pattern to what we had via the noise. But when it comes to those noise patterns, and I think we actually got to a different rig, but a similar idea, which is we need in like After Effects or something, we need to do an animation where we have a black and white version of this happening. You see all this stuff happen. We need a black and white version where you just imagine where all these particles are. They are white, and then the background is black, or the opposite. And that could now drive this displacement. Like all this could be getting displaced via a very set pattern as they're kind of free to move around. That's an idea. And like right now we're super duper deforming this up really far, as we can see here. But we could say, actually, chill out. All we need is a little bit of deformation as those move around. And yeah, then you hide it again. So that's gonna be a little calmer. I just made the exaggeration so we could clearly see the pattern, but you can see how these move around. So just imagine all of those being like a more distinct animation. We just don't have that distinct animation. And I can't think of any easy way of making one, like very geometric. It would take a long time to actually design something that would do it. But do you see the concept there? I don't think I actually want to try and push it much further, because this is the concept. But just trapping it in those shapes and moving them around and letting them transition. And I mean, I guess just as another slight layer here, what if we created a spherical field, and just to show you how controllable this type of thing could be. Here's a spherical field. I will add that to the effect. And that should animate up, right? But I have a feeling those are getting trapped inside. But it should be at 0 in the beginning. But yeah, they're seemingly, it's happening a little too quick. They can't escape. And the dynamics, maybe we need some more steps per frame. Yeah, see, some of those just aren't scooting away based on the shape. But what my point was going to be is if we make that 0, we start this in the beginning. It's like, okay, cool, you got this shape, but then you could go and animate something like, oh, unfortunately, I can't. You can't drag it while it's playing. So over a course of a couple frames, let's have this grow. And hopefully the idea here is like that's going to start small, and you're going to see as it grows, it's pushing all these spheres away. And now, so it's very here we can clearly see there's a hill pushing all those cubes that are being treated as spheres away. If we hide that mesh, then now there's an empty void in the center. But if we just hit play here without that selected, then now we'll just suddenly get a clearing that gives a spherical shape. So do you see how we've translated? Well, essentially we've translated a height map into an actual deformed bit of almost like landscape, and that landscape is scooting these all around. So that's a very definitive way to put them into different pits. That is not the same as just doing a field force. Well, we're not using a field force at all anymore. And yeah, it's pretty neat. So kind of a different concept on that. As a way of saving the scene file, I will add a render display use lines. So it's kind of this wireframe. So if anybody opens up the scene file, they'll be able to conceptually see what I've got going on. And then, just for fun, why don't we add a vibrate tag? Oops, that's target tag. Animation vibrate. 0.1 speed, 155, 155, 155, and actually 0 on Y. So that should be free to kind of slowly, hopefully slowly, wiggle around just to keep that animation alive. It's a bit slow, so I'll go triple the speed. And yeah, now we just get a little bit extra movement of that, scooting those around, doing their own thing. Now those don't, the animation we saw was not based on cubes that were pretending to be spheres. They obviously had actual geometry, and there's nothing to say that we couldn't just change those. And these might tumble in really cool ways, and the more we have, the better they'll look. So giving that another save. Let's actually tell those to calculate as boxes. So now they're going to be tumbling cubes. so they're not going to be as inclined to just freely roll, but you know, gravity is still really yanking down on them. It might be kind of nice. Oh yeah, but right now they're really free to slide, but it might be nice to give them some of that friction back. So that's probably going to make them a little more inclined to roll. Like as they get pushed, they're not going to slide. They might tumble a little bit more. Yeah, you see they're kind of popping as they're kind of forced out of their way. Boink, 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 boink. So yeah, stylistically, just a different idea. And of course, I'm going to speed it up a bit, and then let's just try and create a few more. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's probably not going to... We're going to lose a lot of frame rate here, but we should really see the areas fill up. We could shrink them as well. There might just be too many. And again, one of the keys here is imagining this without that. So now we just get all this motion. And look, I mean, that looks really cool now because they're kind of stacking up on top of each other. There's definitely a volume to it. Conceptually, we could trap them down lower if we really wanted to, but I don't want them escaping through. You see some of those did escape through, but that's because I dropped the steps per frame. But yeah, there's just fewer of them, so they're kind of fighting for the limited space that they have. But hopefully you can see like how you could start layering up this concept and a lot of cool things that could be potentially done with it. But that's a few too many cubes. I'll put this back to a good state, and then yeah, it's visible again. Save that, and that should do that for now. Dean asking, do we even need the vertex field anymore? Can you clarify what you mean by a vertex field? What is a vertex field? Do you mean a vertex map? A vertex weight map? Because vertex weight maps are amazing. We just didn't need one in here. I'm not using it at all. Oh, if you mean here, yeah, this vertex map is doing nothing. I was originally going to drive it via that, but yeah, it's not doing anything in the scene file. I should delete that just so there's no confusion for anybody opening it in Patreon. Second Guess Creative is asking, can you trap them into the shape of an object? Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. Actually, that's a good idea as a way of continuing this. I know I did this spherical field, which is cool, but let me show you some other things we can do. If I make a text spline, we lay that flat on the ground, and let's make something. Let's make my favorite ampersand, and either we want something real fat or real thin. Do we have, what's like the thinnest font we get? Let's do that. Okay, it ends up being not that thin. Is there like a real skinny one? Nothing that super jumps out. That's as good as we're gonna get. So I'll make that relatively large, and I'll scoot this here. So we are deforming. I'm gonna scoot to a time where this is deformed, and temporarily let's make it visible again. So we see how we're deforming that shape. That can be deformed via a lot of different things. I'm gonna drag the spline in just so it's in the relationship to it, and it's adding in the spherical field. But I can drag in this text spline, and you're immediately going to see like kind of a crazy shape happen. And that's once again because it's set to along. But if you set that to radius, then it'll actually look at the radius of that, and this radius we can set this to add on top of everything else. But even cooler than radius in this case is changing curve to something like mask. And if we mask along, I guess we're rotated, so maybe Z is correct. And let's set text spline to normal, so it's kind of overriding. Let's calm all those down. That should be masking downward, right? Yeah. So now you can see it seems to be getting a little confused. Could be the resolution, but that's really twitchy. What is it's getting deformed by the deformer. So this is every time I click, it's going to update, and that's because I made a child of the deformer, so it's getting deformed by the deformer. So I'm going to pull it out of the hierarchy. That'll fix it. So there we go. Now it looks really clean. I was like, wow, I thought that would look really clean. Anyway, here's the text spline. We set it to mask mode, and it's currently on the outside. So you can see that I can drag this up, and we can get like a really cool, smooth version of that text. And that's just a spline shape. So with the way we've been doing all of this, if I hit rewind, it's still at 0. So if I hit play, now that text is going to scoot it out of the way. And it happened a little bit quick and a couple floated up. But ignoring that, once again, hide the plane. And now, and we'll even hide the text, we should definitively see an ampersand shape in there. So that is that shape. Now here's where maybe the vertex map could come back. Yeah, this was a good follow-up. I was kind of like uninspired to continue that one, but this is a cool direction. So let's add that vertex map back in, and let me see if we can change the text and if we can get a cool morph between them. So what am I doing? Selection. Oh, point mode. That's why it's not working. Selection, set vertex weight, done. I would like to see, select the correct thing, see the fields, please. Don't freeze. I would like to feed in the text spline as a mask. And once again, here's that fall off, but we'll keep it simple. So we do that. And now inside of our deformer, I know we've got all the other stuff there. It's all turned off now. Let's feed in the vertex map as a standalone effect. And with any luck, as we let that keyframe, yeah, okay, so the vertex map now is getting keyframed up, or the strength of the deformer is getting keyframed up, and it's based now off the vertex map. So with that being based off the vertex map, we can do whatever we want here. So here's a thought. What if we hit play and we let this ampersand do its thing? And then right here at frame, whatever, 30, at frame 30, let's keyframe the text. And then on the next frame, let's change that to a 7. So in a snap, that's going to turn into a 7. The 7's not very well centered. So I'll type in something. I don't know why the 7 would be so off. Let's do an X. Keyframe. That's a little better. So you'll see that that's just kind of a pop, and that's not going to look too great. That's going to push all these out of the way, and then suddenly in the single frame it's going to pop, so that's not going to do us any good. But if it works, I don't know if it will, inside of a vertex map, we can say, whoa, 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 whoa. You've got some decay going on. So adding in this decay, we've got this maximum, and let's set that to something that we should blatantly see an effect of like 80%. So this is set to a maximum. It's seeing that as a maximum. But now as the X appears, you see it's going to take a while for the other one to disappear. So that's fine. Let's turn off the decay for a moment and try changing this to a delay, and the delay of smooth. So that should maybe smooth out that effect. Actually, I'm going to have to refresh a few times, so let's see what happens now. So now we've got that, and then it pops to the next one, and there we go. Look at that. The X is going to kind of fade its way in as the other one fades its way out. So we didn't need the decay at all. Delay was the good one here. So we set that to whatever speed we want, and now we could have those that change to any letter or number that we want. And those will morph and change and do their thing. Now, you see the shape of this isn't going to naturally make these kind of flow in and fill out that outer shape. Let's see if we can do that. And we'll do that via, I'm going to turn off the delay, and let's have some fun here. If we take this distance and I start really increasing it, like a lot, let's like go crazy. I'm going to increase it until we see, essentially I want every single one of these fully red points to become a little bit orange. So I'm going to keep on increasing until everything is at least a little bit orange. But the X is still there. It's just like fading out over a much larger distance. So now that that's happened, what if we feed in a curve? And this curve can be used to remap those the way that these are mapped. So my thought is we want the top to be full, but then we want to go down, but then we want to go back up again. Okay, looks like these are inverted from what I thought. So we'll pull this over, and we'll scoot this in. And now, yeah, look at that. So because we had that full fall off, I'm now able to remap it however I want. So we could even give this like a nice big subtle curve. So we blatantly get the letter, but then we also have these curves that are forcing everything to flow down to that position. That is now remapping whatever the text is doing, and then we can delay after that. So let's see what happens if we do that. And I'm going to visually hide the plane so we can just see the end result of our individual little cubes. So there's that, and then suddenly, what do we got going on here? Maybe we shouldn't have turned it off because I didn't see much there. Oh, maybe, okay, it did work. It's just that they have so much friction that they're not inclined to roll. For our simplicity's sake, I will set all these back to spheres. And as soon as I do, you see those actually do roll down, so that's why we couldn't see the shape. So let's try that again. So these all move up, and then here it starts and now you see it's morphing into the X shape. Maybe a few extra frames here. We're escaping through the mesh, which is a little bit unfortunate. Like a lot of those are escaping through. There's kind of those explodey pops happening. I really don't want those getting inside. We do have options to avoid that. Like this is not, it's a decently complicated mesh. If you've watched some of my tutorials back in the day, I've talked about the magic of cloning a bunch of spheres. Let's see if that works. I don't know if it will work, but let's make these spheres dynamic. So I'm going to say rigging collider body. They're really big right now, and really they just need to be barely bigger than one of those. Those are going to become the surface. I would like these to clone onto a surface, and that surface, of course, is mode object, clone onto, dang it, cloner, clone onto the plane. I would like it to clone onto each individual vertex, or maybe polygon center. So now you can see I got all these crazy spheres. They're going to calculate as spheres. I'm going to say automatic. These are actually ellipsoids. So those can be as low poly as we can make them. So I'm going to, first of all, let's first change the radius to be as small as is practical. And then we can drop these down. Bink. Okay, so pretty small. I don't, keep in mind, they're going to calculate as spheres no matter what. But those are now essentially shapes that cannot be really escaped through unless they separate enough. So I don't know exactly what that will do. And just for the order of operations, I'll move that down. Let's see what happens. First of all, we probably really just ruined our frame rate, but let's drop assess for frame. And let's make the cubes a little more visible. Okay. Don't know what's going to happen. Might run pretty slow. Okay, so you can see that it's running. Now these are individual spheres. They're pushing around these cubes that are acting as if they're spheres. They do have a lot of friction. I'll get rid of that. And you see that eventually they do separate, but that's going to make it so that it's pretty much impossible for those to escape through. I gotta say those are not doing the best job. Let me make them a little bit larger. They need to overlap each other more. It's probably going to shoot them all into the air, or not. Let's overdo it. Let's do 11. Oh, those are points. Let's do the radius. Okay, that instantly seemed to have done the trick. Oh, at least a little bit. So these are each being calculated as spheres. You see, it really kills our frame rate, but it's a neat trick for being like, no, 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 no. Spheres are almost impossible for anything to escape through because they're very mathematically accurate. So I think that very little is going to be escaping into the inside, but we need them to be overlapping to such a degree that they start becoming kind of a flat surface. It loses some resolution. I really don't want them up on the top, but let's see what ends up happening. Yeah, those pop out, the shape gets emerged, and they're doing a pretty good job of scooting off the side. But a couple are trapped up top, but I'm just curious if looks like a couple might, no, those are up on the top. So look, the technique did work in the fact that nothing is in the interior. So I don't think we gave that quite enough frames to do the full transition, but there's the ampersand. And then morphs into an X. We just need to make these fall off the top. Maybe that's not as, actually, it's not trivial, because we need, it's all about this remapping. So the only thing I can think is we can aim those down a little bit more. Yeah, by aiming those down, there's very little stuff on the top we can deal with, but there is still that initial thickness of the letter, so that, you know, an infinitely thin font would be much better. But having said that, let us grab our text. Let's make those weight just a few extra frames, and then why not do it again a few frames later, so the text can again change. It's still an X at that time, but the next frame will be a, let's do a hashtag. I don't know if it's gonna look good. It's probably a little baby thing. Keyframe that, rewind, and hide everything. Let's see what we can get from that. Yeah, kind of weird, but kind of fun as well. The concept is there. It's a little different. Looks like some of them might, again, no, I don't think too many are floating. Maybe one, two. The only one escaped up. But if we have more points, if they morph around differently, if we make sure they fall off the edge, there could be a little bit of turbulence. I mean, at the end here, there's just not that many of these clones, but the more we add, of course, the slower it will be. I'll try adding a few more. And that's a lot, but I expect significantly more slowdown. That's not terrible for real-time feedback. And then adding in like a little bit of chatter somehow. I wonder if that could do something. But interesting. I mean, that could be a silly method, but I do like the idea of taking, something like a deformer, or, taking a plane that's deformed, in this case by a vertex map. The vertex map is enabling us to morph between the shapes in a somewhat smooth way. Like, it's neat. I still think I would prefer to do an overall method where everything is just drawn splines and you're morphing between them. But you can see how essentially this vertex map is filling in for that black and white animation I was talking about. So I'll save this as version 2. Yeah, I don't know. There's more to explore there. There'd be more things I'd want to experiment with. And then, of course, we need that base animation, the base process of how we want to do it. But yeah, there's something there. It's neat, at least. Welcome, Steel. Well, that's a first time chatters. Thanks for coming and hanging out, everybody. Let's see. Demizard, what do you got? Oh yeah, early on Demizard was saying it was probably a black and white video used as a texture to drive the clones. So that's what I said later. But it's funny, I didn't read any of the chat, but Demizard was saying like use a black and white image, use it in the context, and then what about using consecutive images to change the clones into different shapes so they cluster up using a delay? And I ended up doing that unrelated via a vertex map and mask splines. So as always, like, we're on the same page on those things. Let's see. Mick, let's see what you got as a question. Well, let me see. Second guess. Can you trap them into shapes of an object? Oh yeah, that's what we did tackle. So yeah, Mick's got a question here already. Well, let's see what we got. See if we can squeeze one more in. I've got a YouTube advertisement. I'm going to wait for that to end. Skip. So what do we got? We got, ooh dear. We've got a Marco Polo title sequence from the mill. Nice. We've got a mill in Chicago. I've gotten to visit them a couple of times. So I like that you linked directly to a time code. However, I don't think that this is even like a thing for what, I don't think that this is 3D. First of all, I don't know for sure. It's entirely possible this is photography, that they actually made sure that they dropped ink in, because even look here, like, it's already pre-drawn, and then you just start filming as the water's there. You tilt the paper slightly downward and the ink will drip downward, not upward. So I bet you that this was done for real. This is probably real. After that, I would think that you'd need to do some sort of proper simulations in like After Effects or some 2D program, because there's nothing about this that is specifically 3D. If you were doing this in 3D, it would just be massive, massive, massive particle simulations. Yeah, that's my thoughts, is massive particle simulations would be required. Because, I mean, you've got, like, this is like dynamic flowing water, but it's only going into particular places, which can totally be done. I mean, what they did here, once again, if they did this for real, and nothing I'm seeing here makes me think it wasn't, because you don't see a drop appear at any given moment. So what you would do in real life is draw, like, let me see if it zooms out. Like, you here, we got a wolf. You would, with a paintbrush, you would draw a wolf in water, like, so it's kind of invisible on the paper. And then you put a single drop of black ink, you know, somewhere here near the head, and then they start filming. And that ink will now spread across the water. That's what's really happening. And well, just go, here's the thing: is we could do these spreading animations pretty easily. Yeah, you could do the spreading animation pretty easily, even on a modified version of the rig we just had. You're just not going to get the really cool looks here because we just don't have the resolution or the particles to do all of that different stuff. Now, the super duper kind of boring basic version here, what do we need? Honestly, it's just a vertex map. We can still do the deformation though. So I'll delete. Still need the text, don't need the clones. Don't need that, don't need that. Bring the plane back. And for now, at least, don't deform. So if we save this as the next file, ink drops. What am I thinking? We got that, we don't need that. And this radius can get pulled way back. Yeah, okay, so essentially I've got that, and let's say that's our basis. And I want to sort of spread out a drop of water. So let's add a spherical field, and this is the drop of water. No fall off, please. Pretty tiny though. And that'll hang out here in the corner. And then let's turn off the spline text. So that's right there. That is going to grow. So that gets a freeze, which is set to grow. It's set to 10. Let's be accurate about this. What is our distance? It is 7, so 10 is actually a pretty good number. Let's go up to 15, which is enough to skip to 2. And I'm going to really lower the effect strength. So now as I hit play, that should slowly spread out everywhere. Makes perfect sense. But if we, let's see if this works. If I take the spline text and I move it all the way up, and now I say multiply, now it's going to be constantly erasing out everything that isn't part of itself. So now if I hit play, oh, it's still keyframed. Let's go back to the hashtag. Okay, now it's always a hashtag. Hit play, and now you see the growth happens, but it's constantly getting erased out. But look how we get this instant growth pattern. It's actually real, like it's really growing and spreading out that way because it can only spread to a spot if you know the previous bit has already gotten there. So you know that part is pretty cool. Yeah, that all goes through. If we were inclined, we could duplicate the vertex map a second time, and this vertex map will get everything deleted. We'll feed in the first one. You have to rename it, otherwise it doesn't know how to identify itself, so we'll just call that one 2. Call this one 1. So this one is being fed the original one, but what's cool about this is I can set that to average them, and it's going to blur them, and let's blur them based on 14. Yeah, so it's just a little bit smoother, and based on that smoothing, we can turn on this deformation. I'm going to say deform based on the second smoothed out vertex map. We're getting some, I know why that's happening. How do we stop it? This is happening because it's based on the distance. And this deformer is physically moving out of the distance, but then that moves it into the distance, which moves it back out of the distance. So it becomes a feedback loop. So unfortunately, the only way I can think to do it is to make a duplicate. So this one, let's move the vertex map over here. And so that one is not it's not a feedback loop anymore. So now when this gets fed this, it won't happen. It's a logical feedback loop, but still a bit of a pain. So this effector, I mean, once again, I'm just pushing up here. Let's delete that. We don't need to keyframe that up. Full power. Let's just push it up 15. And there. So now we'll get this nice kind of organic growth pushing those out. So it's kind of a fun growth technique. And, you know, there's tons of things you could imagine doing with that. But as far as getting like that bleeding edge with like that really cool wispy stuff going, nothing really comes to mind. Nothing that would be super coherent. There's things you could do to fake certain things. I mean, even here, we could make another plane if we let that scoot up. Like those will kind of scoot up and just kind of appear out of nowhere. So yeah, so you can just kind of get this natural blending going, which once again, cool looking. That could get subdivided. 1, 1. That should look a little bit more organic. Unless it just breaks it. Apparently, what do we got? Huh. Okay, weird. What did I do? Did I move something? Why did the subdivision surface break it? Maybe something moved. I don't know. Try that again. Huh. I feel like something's moving. Yeah, I think maybe that's not, it's not keyframed on Y. Well, I don't know why that happened, but I moved it back on Y. And now it should be a little bit smoothed out. Or not. What? Okay, yes, please. Okay, finally. 1, 1, just to get a little bit of smoothing. So anyway, back to that being kind of a cool inky growth. Like it does have an ink type vibe, but does it have like that leading edge effect? No, definitely not. I'm trying to think of any way. The problem goes to the vertex maps are not so smooth. They're not like this perfect fall off. And even if they were, the kind of the proximal trick I'm thinking, like it just wouldn't work. No. So yeah, as far like I said, I think they did real photography to do it because it's just an obvious thing to do. Like it's such a complicated thing and it looks so cool by itself that's what I think they did. So here's my consolation prize for you. And yeah, and you could vary the animation speed here by putting different masks on it, slowing it down. We have complete control over the speed here just by changing like some of the properties of the freeze. Like you could soften it up a bunch. Watch, I'm going to double the radius and I cut the speed in half. But what that should do is give us a softer leading edge. Yeah, you see we get this slightly softer leading edge, but the overall speed should be the same. Let me exaggerate it even more. Let's go really exaggerated, 100. This will probably spread really quick. But if we do the effect strength down to like 1%, this might hop some areas. But yeah, see this really small bleeding edge? It does hop because the radius is so large, but you see how we get these different effects. Meanwhile, if we do the radius, minimum radius of about 8, and we set that to 10 degrees, we're going to get a very harsh transition. Like, it is there or it's not there. There's not kind of that pointy beginning. So there's a lot of little tweaks and differences you can do. Double the speed of that. And like I said, overlay and noise. I can't think of any way to map streaks down there. I was trying to even think if we like incredibly subdivided this down, which is not a good idea. But if we did incredibly subdivide it down, we could create streaks, but they'd be the opposite direction that we want. And we've kind of already looked at that. But if no, I can't really easily demonstrate it. But yeah, it would just be a series of loopy materials. It would kind of be like outlines of it. That's not what we want. That's what I got. So how's that growth looking? Yeah, that's good enough. I'm gonna save this one. Demi, this one, I am using 2 vertex maps, but one is doing all the work. The other one is just merely taking it and blurring it a bit. It's taking it and blurring it to make it a little bit smoother. Because you can't blur inside of a single vertex map, but you can by feeding it to another one. Very cool, though. Well, Mick is happy about that. We got about 15 minutes left. Does anybody have any follow-up questions? Yeah, Quack is asking for a thinner, lower version. I mean, yeah, I'll keep on tweaking this one. If somebody gets another question or a follow-up to this one, cool. But I'll just keep playing around with this one until we get another new question. I mean, yeah, this one I can just keep on shrinking that back, which will simultaneously make it thinner and, yeah, that'll make it thinner and not as deep automatically. The resolution is heavily dependent. It's going to heavily affect the way that this looks. Anything we do to one plane, we need to do to the other. So selecting both of them, select all, hit US for subdivide. And yeah, so this is now double, well, 4 times actually the resolution. Let's see what happened here. What did happen here? Oh, I was just confused because we had to start over again. So yeah, that I've now done 4 times the resolution, so it's gonna be like 4 times as accurate. The text spline, once again, as mentioned, the thickness of it is kind of a finite resource. We can't physically make that thinner without making a thinner font. Possibly we could invert the direction inside of this vertex map just for our clarity. Let's set that to normal. This text is set to outside. We could say it's set to inside, and then, oh yeah, so that'll fade it out there. So that is a way of getting it a bit thinner there. And that, again, can be remapped via some sort of curve, or you can even do it in your remapping. So we could curve that one. And as I pinch in, you can see it's getting thinner. Once again, limited to the resolution of the vertex map. We can very much see the individual points and polygons popping out there, but super duper thin now. And now that being there, that can go back to multiply, freeze, sphere. That should be the entire growth system back again. So if I hit rewind, we should see, yeah, that's going to grow. That should still be transferring, yeah, that's still transferring properly over here. But the averaging, this layer is averaging a lot. We'll cut that in half. Yeah, cut that in half. So it's still blurring, but it's blurring sharper. And yeah, those travel through now. Put the subdivision surface on to get those smoothed out even further. And get the original plane back for intersection purposes. And yeah, just, you know, thinner. But the resolution of our vertex map is the ultimate limiting variable there. And you will get a lot of slowdown because this is a lot of points, each checking its own number and then checking against its neighbors and possibly its neighbors' neighbors and then blurring. Lots of things there. Yeah, Tobias, as always, thanks. We've got the Rocket Lasso Slack channel. I'm going to post this on YouTube as well. Head on over to the Rocket Lasso Slack channel to continue the conversation. Let me pop open the window because why not? So this is going to bring you to, come on, tear off. That'll bring you to the Rocket Lasso community page, and you can click the Sign Me Up button, and that will let you into the Slack channel. Looks like we've got a Rocket Lasso challenge 104, the skateboard, and then somebody did a Redshift quick tip. Looks like the images are loading a little slow. Might need to look into that. Yeah, skateboard challenge, and then a Redshift repeating a ramp quick tip. So yeah, those are all put together by the community, so it's pretty cool. So yeah, definitely head over to there. I suppose it's a fine thing to mention all the Patreon stuff. I gotta keep the business going. As much as I just like talking about cinema, I do need to keep it a viable business. Let me see if it opens up properly. I'll open it up in not the creator view. Yeah, so here is the Rocket Lasso Patreon. You can get different access to different things, and we got lots of different posts going. These are the making of the gems, and I've been recording some Ricochet tutorials, which are going to be coming out soon. And then you get early access to all the tutorials and the replays and lots of cool scene files. So, yep, if you're interested in supporting. But ultimately, the tutorials come out for free for everybody. And, boop. And I like making sure that everybody has access to as much of stuff as is possible. Dean is asking for any teaser images from the new plugins. Nope, no teaser images. They're in beta. We just need to get them going. One of them I don't think is going to make for a very good commercial. It just doesn't have that. It just doesn't lend itself to commercial. But the other two do. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But yeah, that should, I think, be wrapping this one up. As I mentioned, I'll even track down the link again if possible. I'm going to be joining the Ask a Trainer, the Maxon Ask a Trainer folks. I got a lot of windows open now from all these links. Yeah, I'm going to be doing the Ask a Trainer with Maxon. Here we go. Open this. Aha. So yeah, here's the Maxon Ask a Trainer. I'm looking forward to that. It should be cool. Go and sign up for that, and I'll see you there. I think it's going to be, it's early in the morning, so if this is really late in the day for you, that will be helpful. I'm essentially going to wake up and immediately go and do this. And it should be fun. So yeah, totally sign up, hang out. I'll see you there. And I'll see everybody on the bonus stream. Well, you know, the Patreon people on the bonus stream on Tuesday. And, you know, keep an eye out for the plugins. They're not quite ready, but we're trying to get them ready very quickly. So we'll just see how that goes. So yeah, I think that is going to wrap this one up, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. And yeah, see you tomorrow or Tuesday or next Wednesday. So bye-bye, everybody.